Good afternoon, morning, or evening to wherever you are. Thank you very much for your patience and for joining this webinar today. My name is Bhava Dungana, and I work with the Mitigation and Transparency Support Unit from the Mitigation Data and Analysis Program of the UN Climate Change Secretariat here in Bonn. My unit that we are working with, we provide support to non-Annex 1 parties for preparing their national reports, and this also includes supporting the work of the consultative group of experts in implementing this work program. I would like to welcome you to the 6th webinar of the 2018 CGE webinar series. The aim of the CGE webinar series is to provide a platform for the practitioners to take an in-depth focus on specific methods or tools and learn from other country experiences in the implementation of measurement, reporting, and verification, or MRV, and transparency of climate action and support. Today's webinar is on estimating costs of health and adaptation. The webinar is organized jointly with the World Health Organization, WHO. We have with us for this webinar from WHO the team which has been leading the work on climate change and health. This is Mr. Jeremy Campbell-Landrum, Ms. Elena Villalobos-Pras, and Mr. Vladimir Kembrovsky. This webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes, and we have allocated another 15 minutes for any spillover. Just a few housekeeping before we start. Please mute your mic if it has not already been done so automatically from the system. For the Q&A session, which will be after the presentation, please send your questions to the Secretariat using the chat function of this webinar. And please send them during the webinar itself and don't wait till the very end. The first speaker is Diarmuid, who will provide an overall introduction of the webinar. This will be followed by Elena and then Vladimir. Diarmuid, the floor is yours, after which you can give it to Elena. And all right.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I'll just say a few words of introduction to the content of the webinar. As UNFCCC colleagues have just said, we are responsible for the Climate Change and Health Program at WHO here in headquarters in Geneva, and also Vladimir from European office, from the office in Bonn. And we're very pleased to be doing this webinar in partnership with UNFCCC Secretariat, mainly because health has always been central to the climate change negotiations. It's one of the main motivations, in fact, for the original UNFCCC. The convention itself, signed in 1992, is aims to prevent the adverse effects of climate change, and health is cited as one of those three adverse effects that the actions under the treaty aim to prevent. And you will also be aware that the right to health is in the preamble of the Paris Agreement. I think it recognises the centrality of protection of people's lives and people's health from the risks of climate change. It's also an important connection from the other side as well, from the health side. In recent years, there's been a much greater appreciation from the health community of the importance of climate risks to health and the potentially devastating effects that climate change may have on global public health. And we see that now at our World Health Assembly, when the Ministers of Health convene here in Geneva every year. Climate change is now an absolutely central part of the discussions, and that has really changed within the last few years. And the reason I think that this webinar is particularly important is that now that everybody understands, that most people understand that climate change is important to health, health is important to climate change, we have to be quite concrete about what we aim to do about that, and that means spending resources. Resources are limited, so we need to have the best possible evidence of the economic impacts of climate change on health, select the best interventions, most cost-effective interventions, and so on. The economics is always important because we're aiming to basically, in many cases, spend public and private money to counter this risk. Just a couple of comments on why this is particularly, why the health dimension is particularly important in economic terms. So health is now a very large part of the global economy. It's about 10% of the global economy and growing. And there's a lot of expensive infrastructure. There are a lot of expensive and fragile supply chains that underpin provision of health protection to populations. So it's therefore important to know what damages climate change may make to the parts of the health system, the infrastructure and so on. The other important dimension is that, of course, human lives and human health. You can say that they're beyond value, but if people, when people do try and take valuations of human life and human health, it's very clear that society places a very high valuation on human health and on human lives. So for all of those reasons, it's critically important that we consider the health, climate change and economic dimensions together. And for the most part, most of the adaptation interventions that we would like to make to protect people's health from climate change, they are no-regret interventions. They're things which will save lives now as well as increase resilience to climate change. But having said that, we still want better evidence in order to select the best use of the limited resources that we have. And as was made clear in the introduction, for monitoring, verification, transparency, and so on, we want the best information that we have on this interaction. So with those few words of introduction, I'll hand over to my colleagues, first Elena and then Vladimir. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, for this great presentation and overall introduction. And I will just provide an overall introduction to health and climate change and to the economic dimension of health and climate change. As you all know, climate change has both direct and indirect impacts in the health of the population. Some of the direct health impacts caused by climate variability and change are those linked to mortality and morbidity from single events, also heat stress and, for example, flooding. But there are also indirect health impacts caused by climate variability and change, like, for example, those mediated through natural systems like mosquitoes, allergens, and increasing water and air pollution, and also they are mediated through social disruption or economic disruption, such as mental health and food production. In terms of health, when we think about the global burden of disease, most of the climate-sensitive diseases are one of the main killers nowadays. For example, if you just think about undernutrition, it kills more than 3 million people per year. And any change in weather or climate conditions will determine an increase in the impact of these diseases. At the health sector, we have a systematic approach to health adaptation. When we went to work in countries, basically we were getting the message from the health sector that they needed like concrete ways and recommendations on how they could strengthen health systems for it to really become resilient to climate change. So based on projects and interventions that we piloted and managed to prove their effectiveness, and we came to define what we call the operational framework for building climate resilient health systems. We did this overall approach in 2015. And then what we basically took is the 6 building blocks of health systems, which are reflected in the inner circle of the slide that you are seeing now. These 6 building blocks are health workforce, health information system, technologies and infrastructure, service deliveries, or how we really implement those programs like, for example, anti-nutrition, diarrheal diseases, malaria, and then financing. So basically we define key functions under each of these building blocks that should be strengthened or put in place for health systems or health programs to become resilient to climate change. And then just as an example to see it clearly, under health information systems, we define and we have methodologies in place also to conduct vulnerability capacity and adaptation assessments to climate change and health. Then further guidance on how to integrate climate information and weather variables into surveillance systems, and also how to conduct, when feasible, design and implement climate-informed health early warning systems. And then all these things that are included under the information pillar should be taken into consideration, this information, to really change the way health systems and programs are functioning, which is translated in service delivery. And under those, the key function is to make sure that health programs are informed by climate, and that all the information that we saw before is really from distribution or prevention interventions. Then the management of environmental determinants of health, such as water, sanitation, air pollution, and then emergency preparedness and management. There's also an increasing coverage and experience in climate and health programs. WHO has been implementing projects since more than 10 years now, and thanks to these interventions we really have gathered knowledge on the effectiveness of interventions that should be put in place to really protect the health of vulnerable populations. These slides mainly reflect the key projects that have been implemented globally on health and climate change. As you can see, there are 12 key projects, multi-country projects, with a budget of over $100,000 per year. And as you can see, most of these have been managed by WHO, thanks to the support of donors like DFID, Flanders, the GEF, and also in collaboration with relevant partners in some cases. Something that is very important also to understand the economic dimension of health and preventive measures is how much the health sector is investing nowadays on prevention. Out of the total expenditure on health, only 3.6% goes to prevention and public health services, while almost 50% of the global burden of disease is caused by causes that could be prevented through prevention and public health interventions. So this is something that as WHO we are trying to change. We are trying for key sectors to make sure that they also invest in self-promoting strategies and policies, but it's important to really understand how important prevention is. This is a slide developed by the International Monetary Fund, which reflects on the importance of economics, also on how health is key to mitigation. This is a study where the IMF basically looks at the global picture of energy subsidies at the global and regional level. And basically they assess subsidies not as direct payments to energy producers or countries, but they consider a post-tax energy subsidy, which is basically arising when consumer prices are below supply cost, plus a tax to reflect the environmental damage and additional tax that should be applied to all consumption goods to raise government revenue. So basically they realized that the energy subsidies were much higher than expected, and they stated that by putting the right price to carbon in line with the health impacts that are being caused through CO2 emissions and air pollution, countries could save approximately 50% of air pollution debt, and 20% of they could reduce 20% the emissions of CO2, while generating approximately 3% of GDP in tax revenues. So just to consider, which is this is a great proof that by putting a price to carbon that really includes the cost to health and the health sector of caused by air pollution, countries will win really. Just to reflect on this, nowadays air pollution is already causing approximately 7 million deaths per year, so this has huge implications. When it comes to estimating the cost of adaptation in the health sector, there are three main global assessments conducted so far. Two of them, which are the ones that are included in the slide, were conducted by the World Bank and the UNFCCC as part of multi-sectoral adaptation assessment studies. And as you can see in the slide, the World Bank includes the lowest price for health adaptation, which is 2 billion per year, while the UNFCCC study considers that approximately between 3.8 and 4.4 billion per year are needed to ensure health adaptation to climate change. These studies have already limitations. For example, the one of the World Bank doesn't include the costs related to malnutrition, which are included indeed under agriculture, and then both are not comprehensive. There are lots of health impacts that are not included into the cost that they estimated. For example, those related to extreme weather events and to other illnesses such as malaria. So if we really conduct a comprehensive assessment, the cost would not be lower than 5 billion per year. When thinking about the impact of climate change on health, those are mainly translated into mortality and illness, morbidity, and then all these, both mortality and morbidity, have economic impacts associated with them. If you think about mortality, the clear and evident economic impacts are translated in loss of welfare to society, and then foregone income and wealth creation. And then if we want to evaluate and to get an economic valuation of these impacts, then we will have to use different methodologies, such as the value of the statistical life for loss of welfare, and then human capital approach for foregone income. In relation to illness and morbidity, there are clear, when population gets ill, then there's a clear cost by the health sector, and then when it goes to loss of productivity, then there are opportunity costs of time, for example, suffered by the ill person itself. As a summary, and now I will hand over after this slide to my colleague Vladimir, who has a very useful and practical example to give you. But basically, we consider that adaptation planners need to know the cost of inaction, which is basically not doing anything, which is in terms of economic consequences of the first impact of climate change that we saw in the first slide, and then the cost of action, basically getting the right price of the adaptation interventions that they are going to put in place. Also, as Yarmin said in the overall introduction, it should be, we need more evidence on the cost and the cost effectiveness of the different interventions that can be put in place to promote health adaptation to climate change. Lastly, planners need to know the residual cost. As we all know, even if adaptation measures are put in place, this will not avert all the climate-related health impacts. So it is very important to really understand the residual cost. So with this, I hand over to my colleague Vladimir, who will continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Elena. Yes, indeed, the WHO prepared the economic analysis tool as a support for adaptation planning for health in member states. And the tool consists of a manual and the Excel spreadsheet. The manual describes the steps and inputs required and the methods and analysis for filling in data sheets. And the Excel spreadsheet comprises 5 worksheets, 3 for data input and 2 for output, which include integrated formulas to facilitate the calculation. Of course, there are no black boxes or formulas are open. Next slide, please. And for the purpose of this webinar, we will use one example of the country which is prone to hot spells, and the heat waves are projected to increase in frequency and intensity with climate change. And based on some previous modeling, the Ministry of Health in this country has determined the projection mortality and morbidity attributable to heat waves in the next 5 years. And they have also ascertained the fraction that is due to climate change, which is not realistic but it is possible to be estimated by this tool. Next slide, please. Of course, the scope of the economic assessment was to evaluate the health costs and to evaluate the patient cost. This figure illustrates the methodological steps in the tool analysis, and this is well described in the manual. The steps in the red squares are to be undertaken either before the economic assessment on how damages, because you can see here that you have to define the criteria on sensitive outcomes, the obtained baseline mortality and morbidity, and estimate the mortality and morbidity attributable to climate change, or later on to estimate the effectiveness. But you should be aware that several types of technical knowledge are needed to use the tool, including economics, epidemiology, public health, and health information. And the user should be prepared to seek information for several ministers and some public health and healthcare institutions. Next slide, please. Yes, we consider the health cost or the health damage cost that defined in our tool as the cost associated with climate change in the absence of planned adaptation or mitigation responses. And in our example, for damage costs, we use 5 years of retrospective analysis where included and then we included the 10 years of projection, so in total around 15 years. The projection was based on a number of cases. Men and women were disaggregate, also cardiovascular and respiratory diseases were included. Then the daily, the disability adjusted life years for cardiovascular and respiratory diseases were calculated using the WHO method. And other types of disaggregation based on country needs and the scope of the study are possible, such as by disease type, then rural, urban location, age group, income group, or sex. In each application of the Excel tool are possible up to 10 disaggregation. As we see in this example, we start to make our damage costs. In fact, we calculate, that's the base calculate methodology was devised based on common economic methods for estimating the cost of illness, and the premature deaths were valued using the value of statistical life, something which Elena was mentioned before. Then the productivity used the average daily GDP per capita multiplied by the average number of days of illness, and then care using the healthcare charges for the health insurance fund and the average use of outpatient service. All these data were calculated. Next slide. Thank you. And based off the calculation, we got some result. And imagine the health impacts of these two climate-sensitive diseases. They estimate by the Public Health Institute of the country include the attribution to climate change. And the study suggests that roughly 1/5 of total cardiovascular and respiratory diseases are due to climate change, because the heat waves are an important contributor to the average mortality from these two diseases. But when we also tried when we put that and the cost of the healthcare for the morbidity and to damage cost to value economically, we see that it's a significant impact, almost 1% of the GDP, less than 1% of the GDP of the country, which is really a very important one. Next slide, please. Thus, we propose to this country, and we support as WHO, to implement a national heat health action plan. The Ministry of Health was involved, the public health institution, other care provider, and local government. And this heat health action plan includes all elements relevant to these guidelines, and it's translated to the action and linked by the implementing agency in the data set we use. They develop the action plan on this, how they can support the implementation. And this is very important, because the preventing the health effects of heat waves requires a series of action, and optimally a country prone to hot spells should have a full heat health action plan in place. Next slide, please. Of course, it needs some cost to implement this action to be in place, and once the health impact has been agreed, the interventions that are likely to be needed for a rational reason should be planned or simulated, because the cost can be shown in a variety of ways. The left figure here gives an example of annual recurrent cost, household cost for support agency, and the rest are divided between health agency and other national agencies. But also some investment costs are needed, such as infrastructure, equipment, and training are important for effective health preparedness and response. These are different in every country. In this example, the main one of investment is made by the Ministry of Health and Social Infrastructure, and less investment by the local government, as you see from the right figure. And these costs include energy efficiency measures, air conditioning, and water fountains in hospital and nursing homes, and communication and awareness raising for medical staff and the general public. And the investment costs such as infrastructure, equipment, and training are important for effective health preparedness and response. As I mentioned in our study, in our tool, The health adaptation costs we define as the cost of taking measures to reduce or to cope with additional impact arising as a result of climate change. So from one side, we see that we define the health damage cost, and now we estimate the adaptation cost. Next slide, please. And of course, in this example, it is possible to compare the damage costs and of the increase in disease cases in that was not averted with the cost of adaptation. It is expected partial reduction in the health impact. As I mentioned, the scope of this study in the beginning was to evaluate the health cost and to evaluate the adaptation cost. So we have here the total damage cost per year, about 2,700,000 euros per year, and adaptation costs are 240,000 euros per year. And the tool also facilitates the health economic valuation, in which the cost and benefit of health adaptation measures are compared with an estimate of a turn of spending in the form of cost-effectiveness ratio. So you can see for one spend of adaptation, you avert 12 euros per year. So it is definitely a cost-benefit ratio. In fact, the monetary return per currency unit spend. So these summary indicators are provided to help understanding of the overall result of the calculation, but also it is very important to the analyst must always acknowledge the certainty in the proportion of disease cases and that's attributed to the climate change and how many could be averted by the adaptation measure. So it is difficult to make the full cost-benefit comparison, but definitely such information is very valuable for decision makers when they start to discuss about the limited budget. Next slide, please. And of course, this manual is available on this site, and we also can provide the actual spreadsheet. It is available upon the request, of course, free of charge. Just you need to write to us and tell us about the organization profile and interpretation of the tool. And you will receive the actual sheet. By now, for example, we received a lot of requests, mostly from academia, about 33%. Then we have from national government, about 50% of the requested, also from the locals, but also we received from some profit organization as well, around 13%. So with this, I will finish here, and thank you very much for this possibility to share with you our tool.
Great. Thank you, Vladimir, for a very frequent presentation. I would actually like the participants to send in any questions you may have. And just to kick off the discussion, one of the questions was for a country when they are preparing these their data for such a table, what were some of the main challenges that they had come across, and how were those challenges addressed? So I open the floor to any of the panelists
I can share maybe the example using this tool. It is the real example from the Republic of Macedonia, and it is done for the purpose of piloting the tool. Yes, indeed, there are a lot of challenges, but as I said, as a first step, the team should define the scope of the purpose. Definitely, there needs some prerequisites of the information, as I said, some projections, some vulnerability impact assessment on the topic. Because this can be used not only for the kids, definitely, but also for other, for the implementation of many other climate change adaptation early warning systems on different settings, or but definitely the data are very important to be available, and sometimes it's not always the case, and sometimes we need to discuss with the institution and trying to obtain the separate studies to obtain some of the data. But it's work because even it's time-consuming process, it is also a process of building the capacity and establish the good relationship with other sectors outside of the cloud. And it is important to be, from my personal experience, it's worth to make the effort.
Okay, thank you. So we have received one or two more questions, and one question is, how come the investment / CapEx cost for infrastructure for adaptation of schools, etc., is very low / zero? I would have thought some upfront capital expenditure investments would be required. So, Vladimir, would you like to take that question?
I'm not sure that it was zero. In the opposite, we see that in fact the cut of investment, for example, the construction of the hospital on energy efficiency is only once. So and probably it's not go through year by year because it's one process. So that's why maybe it was received as it's confused maybe, but it is only one process in the coming 10 years, and but then in this tool, even it is one expenditure. It is then calculate as an average for 10 years, because as I said, there are a lot of we have a projection of 10 years of the implementation of this Six Health Action Plan. So it should not be definitely a zero. Maybe it's not well presented.
Okay, thank you. Elena or Jeremy, would you like to add to this question?
Sure. We are just resolving the echo issue. I think that the question in general is an important one about yes, the capital investment. As I mentioned at the beginning, health in general is quite a highly capital intensive sector. So there are large investments that need to go into health infrastructure and that are continually going into health infrastructure. And we are just starting to get experience of investing in climate resilience and at the same time usually renewable energy for healthcare facilities. So there are now some quite large projects. There has been some work done in Europe, but I think large projects now in the Caribbean and elsewhere in terms of investing, putting in the additional investment to retrofit hospitals or to upgrade the standards of hospitals so that they have a higher resilience, usually to extreme weather events, but also at the same time take the opportunity to make them more energy efficient as well, or to integrate renewable energy. So we're just starting to get the information on the costings for those. I think in some cases the difficulty is in partitioning out what is the investment that you would need to make anyway to provide the health service, plus the additional investment that you may need to make it resilience because of climate change. And I think it's important to try to delineate those, but at the same time to recognize that in many cases that doesn't make a lot of difference to the health sector. They just need the investment to go in to give them a good hospital that's resilient and has lower energy costs without being so fixated on the climate change issue per se. But it's just to say that looking at the infrastructure costs is very important, and we are starting to get information on that, which we could provide perhaps in separate communications.
Great, thank you. Another question that we received was, are all economic valuation costs same in different countries, or is it different region to region? So, Jeremy, would you like to take this and pass it on?
I'll just make a general comment, perhaps there. I think the answer is it depends. Usually, to be relevant, we would be talking about, particularly for things like infrastructure costs, you would probably want to look at what it actually costs to put into place infrastructure in the particular environment, the particular context, particular country that you are looking at. Because usually you're trying to choose between making one investment either within a health system compared to something else you do within the health system or outside, and usually that's within an envelope of national resources that you're comparing with other things that you could do with that money at the national level. So it doesn't make a great deal of sense if you're dealing with these issues in Bangladesh to say we'll apply the same costs as you would in the United States. So that's what I would say on the sort of the infrastructure side. There are ethical issues, given that some of the costs that we're talking about are actually placing valuation on a human life. There are ethical issues that you need to be careful about saying, well, we'll put a different cost on saving a life in one country compared to another, which would probably take a longer discussion. I think in general, you first have to define your population of interest and where the resources may be coming from, and usually you want to compare within that environment. But Vladimir may have some more detail on that.
I can, yes, the economic valuation is very important. Maybe the question should follow the same economic logic. So you discuss about the constraints. Maybe I can say something which is common. For example, each government needs to know the health damage cost associated with business as usual, as we mentioned before, as, for example, no adaptation, but also the cost of understanding the necessary measures to minimize or prevent the health damage due to climate change is very important for everybody, everywhere. And also how they merge between them is something which can support everywhere the policy and decision makers in their decision. Definitely this is only one of the many other factors, but it can be definitely supportive one.
Great, thank you, Vladimir. So actually, we don't have any more questions. I'll ask the participants if they have any questions to send it to me via the chat. While I just let everybody know, I received some questions about the material. The material is available on the UNFCCC website, and in the chat function, I'm actually sending the link to where all this information, the presentation, and including the other documents which was shared by Vladimir in the presentation, has already been uploaded to our website as well. Okay, I just got a question saying that somebody has sent 2 questions on the Q&A tool. let me just, it's not coming. If the participants could send it again, because I don't see it, would appreciate it. Yeah. No. Yeah, if you could, just send it again in the chat function, and then we will try to.
Barbara, may I suggest something?
Yeah.
Because we also put our emails. So if anybody later on has any questions, just do not hesitate to contact us.
Sure.
We will be available.
I got the questions already. So how does the tool that the tool developed link to the framework presented by Elena? So Vladimir, the tool that you presented, how does that link to the overall framework? And if this tool can be used for the DNA assessment in health sector? So maybe the first question, Vladimir, I hand it over to you.
Well, definitely it's supported because the action should be started from the local to national and global level. So this is, as I said, very tool which can be used at the subnational and national level, and definitely can support then the other colleagues, because it is definitely one of the streams revenue where we can reach more efficient evidence on the health impact, the climate change health impact.
Then one more question to Diamond, actually, specifically. Are there any innovative methods for raising funds for health? And how much interest is there in ensuring that these initiatives are climate resilient?
I think it's a very good question, because I think the issue is, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, health is an important sector. It's compared to some other sectors. There are a lot of resources in health. As I said, it's something like 10% of the global economy. But as Elena mentioned in her slides, almost all health resources are spent effectively on treatment, and the systems that provide treatment. So you end up in a situation where those people dealing with the environment and climate change will assume that health should have resources to address these issues, because health people are saying these issues are important, and these are big, important ministries. Whereas the health ministries themselves will say, yes, this is important, but we don't have spare capacity. In most cases, we're already overstretched dealing with cure, rather than wanting to spend the additional money that would be necessary to make health systems climate resilient. So I think there is interest there, but we are in a bit of a catch-22, a difficult situation where there are not necessarily spare resources within the health sector. One of the reasons why this kind of work on the economics is important is because in some cases we are able to show that an investment that is made in climate resilience actually saves money over the long term, so that you would be better off investing health resources, even though they're constrained, into the prevention side, because it will actually save you money in the long run. So that's one line of argument, and so that's why it's important to collect this kind of information. The other is that we do consider that health is effectively neglected from climate funding. There's only somewhere between 1% and 2% of the climate adaptation funds, multinational funds for climate, that go into protecting health from climate change, because the health sector is generally not very well connected to these mechanisms. We think that there are very good reasons why that should be a higher proportion. And that's why these kinds of tools are so important. So yes, there should be more investment. There is interest, and we're trying to provide the evidence to convince the health sector to invest its own resources, while also making the case as to why there should be some additional support from the fund.
Yes, definitely, that's true. And there's a comment actually from the participant who is Kai Chen, and I think to see. It says it looks like it might be important to make the health-related SDG climate resilient. All right, so those are all the questions that we received, and I don't see any more questions in the chat function. So let me just, I'd like to thank everyone who's participated and took the time to be here for this webinar, and also I would like to thank the team from WHO for also taking your time for presenting your tools on this topic. As mentioned earlier, the presentation and the background document is already available on the CGE webinar series page, which link I have already shared with the participants. And we have also made a recording of this webinar, which we should be able to upload next week sometime. And once that is uploaded, we would email all the participants as well of the availability of this recording. And lastly, before we close, I'd like to inform you that we will have a survey, an assessment survey that will open up after you have completely closed this webinar. So we would appreciate if you could just complete the survey. It will take about 5 minutes of your time, and this would help us to continuously improve these webinars. And I'd also like to inform you that the next CGE webinar will be held on 31 July on the GHG baselines and monitoring in the transport sector, and alternative fuels, incentives, regulations, and production. We will share this announcement through email, and if you are on Facebook, you can follow the Mitigation and Transparency Exchange page to get updates on the webinar series. So thank you again to Jeremy, Elena, and Vladimir for this webinar. Now they ask me like the question when I'm like